Picture this. You're driving alone at midnight, taking that shortcut everyone warns you about, when your radio suddenly locks onto Billie Jean and the volume knob stops working, the beat pounding through your speakers even after you've yanked the keys from the ignition. What would you do if every time you tried to escape, chapel bells echoed through the darkness and that same Michael Jackson song started over from the beginning, trapping you in an endless loop? The man who took the exit 7 shortcut last Sunday thought he was just avoiding traffic. But when he pulled into that abandoned chapel parking lot to turn around, something ancient and hungry noticed him. Something that feeds on the desperate prayers of those who realize too late that some shortcuts lead straight to hell. That forgotten chapel at exit 7 has been empty for decades. Locals say, yet every Sunday night, drivers report hearing gospel music drifting across the highway, mixed with the unmistakable voice of the King of Pop himself. And those brave enough to investigate never quite remember what happened during those missing hours between midnight and dawn. Our story tonight follows David Chen, a traveling salesman who made the fatal mistake of ignoring his GPS warnings about the closed road ahead, choosing instead to follow that faded exit sign promising a quicker route home, never imagining that the crumbling chapel waiting in the darkness had been conducting the same Sunday service since 1984. The year Thriller topped the charts, and something unspeakable happened in that holy place. As David's Honda Civic rolled into that empty lot, the dashboard clock froze at 11:47 p.m. The radio crackled to life without power. And through the static came those 4 unforgettable notes that would soon become his prison, his punishment, and perhaps his purgatory. Because in this place where time bends and reality breaks, every service begins the same way, with the same song, and the congregation never leaves. If this story sends shivers down your spine, hit that subscribe button and join us on the dark roads ahead. David's hands trembled as he shifted into reverse. But the Honda lurched forward instead, rolling deeper into the chapel's gravel lot while Billie Jean thundered through speakers that shouldn't have been working. The bass line so loud it rattled his rearview mirror and made his teeth ache. The headlights swept across the chapel's rotting wooden facade, revealing broken, stained glass windows that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. And as David slammed the brakes, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the dust. Dozens of them, all leading to the same spot where his car now sat idling against his will. He grabbed his phone to call for help, but the screen showed nothing except the time, 11:47 p.m. The same time his dashboard clock displayed, frozen like everything else in this place, except for that relentless song which had just reached its bridge before cutting off abruptly. The silence so complete, he could hear his own heartbeat until the chapel bells began to toll. Deep bronze notes that shouldn't have been possible from a building abandoned since the Reagan administration. With each bell strike, David watched in mounting horror as other cars materialized in the lot around him. Phantoms of vehicles from different decades. A wood-paneled station wagon here, a rusty pickup there, all with their radios glowing despite their obvious decay. And through their dusty windows, he could make out the silhouettes of drivers, heads tilted back, mouths open as if singing or screaming. The bells stopped at 12 strikes, and immediately, Billie Jean started again from the beginning. Those same 4 notes drilling into David's skull as he fumbled with his seatbelt, kicked open the door, and stumbled onto gravel that crunched too loudly in the unnatural quiet between verses. The chapel doors stood 20 feet away, painted white but peeling like diseased skin. And David noticed they were slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. But darkness that moved, that breathed, that whispered along with Michael Jackson's voice about the kid not being his son. He turned to run back toward the main road, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Each step forward somehow bringing him closer to those doors instead. And as he fought against this impossible gravity, he saw them clearly for the first time. The congregation, standing in neat rows just inside the chapel, their Sunday best clothes from 1984 hanging off bodies that hadn't aged quite right, their eyes reflecting his headlights like a pack of animals. They swayed in perfect unison to the beat. And David realized with crystallizing terror that there was an empty space in their formation, a gap exactly his size. Waiting between a woman in a flowered dress and a man whose face seemed to shift between young and ancient with each flicker of shadow. And as the song reached its first chorus again, David felt his own body beginning to move to the rhythm, his resistance crumbling like the chapel's paint. Understanding finally that Exit 7 didn't just trap you with a song, it made you part of the performance. Another voice in an eternal Sunday service where the king of pop never died and the faithful never got to leave. David's feet moved against his will, each step syncing perfectly with the beat as his body betrayed him, dragging him toward that gap in the congregation where shadows writhed like living things. And he could see their faces clearly now, frozen in expressions of rapture and terror, their lips moving in perfect synchronization to lyrics they'd been mouthing for 40 years. The woman in the flowered dress turned her head toward him with a mechanical precision that made his stomach lurch, her eyes milky white but somehow still seeing. And she reached out one hand, fingers bent at impossible angles, beckoning him to take his place as the song hit its second verse. And David felt his own mouth beginning to form the words he'd never meant to sing. Behind the congregation, deeper in the chapel's bowels, something massive shifted in the darkness, a presence that felt older than the building itself, older than the highway, something that had been waiting here long before humans built their roads and churches, using this holy ground as bait for travelers who thought they knew better than their GPS warnings. David's phone in his pocket began to heat up, burning through his jeans, and when he pulled it out, the screen showed hundreds of missed calls, all from his own number, all time-stamped 11:47 p.m. from different dates going back decades. And in the reflection of the dark screen, he saw his face aging rapidly, his hair graying, skin wrinkling, then snapping back to youth as the song looped again. The congregation parted like a sea of decay, creating a clear path to the altar where David could now see the source of the music, an ancient radio sitting on the pulpit, its dial glowing that same sickly green as the phantom car radios outside. But this one was different, special, because wrapped around it were what looked like intestines made of pure sound waves, pulsing with each beat, feeding something underneath the floorboards that breathed in rhythm with the bass. David tried to scream, but only the lyrics came out, his voice harmonizing with the hundreds of others trapped here. And he understood with perfect clarity that this wasn't just about the song. It was about the year it played everywhere, when something had torn through the veil between worlds right here in this chapel, during a real Sunday service. And the only thing keeping it contained was this endless loop, this prison of rhythm and repetition. His legs carried him past the congregation, up the rotting wooden steps to the altar where the radio waited. And as his hand reached out to touch it, David saw the truth reflected in its glowing dial, saw himself taking his place not in the congregation, but as the new guardian, the fresh battery this thing needed to keep playing for another 40 years. And as his fingers made contact with the warm metal, Every car in the lot honked in unison, their horns creating a hellish chord that merged with the song's climax, while the chapel bells began tolling backward, counting up from zero as David felt his consciousness splitting. Part of him sinking into the radio circuits, while another part remained standing, frozen, becoming the newest addition to this infernal choir that would sing the same song every Sunday night, until someone else took the exit 7 shortcut. The radio's metal surface burned like ice against David's palm, and through it, he could feel the heartbeat of every person who had touched it before him. Their memories flooding his mind in a cascade of Sunday nights stretching back to 1984. Each one ending the same way, with someone new taking their place at the altar, while the previous guardian joined the congregation below. Their consciousness absorbed into the collective rhythm that kept this thing fed and contained. David watched helplessly as his reflection in the radio's dial began to fracture, showing him at different ages simultaneously: a child, a teenager, an old man, all trapped in this moment as the song reached its bridge, and the congregation swayed harder, their movements creating a wind that shouldn't exist inside a building. A wind that carried the smell of decades-old cologne and perfume mixed with something sulfurous rising from beneath the floorboards. The chapel walls began to breathe, expanding and contracting with the bass line, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond them. A vast darkness filled with eyes that had been watching since before humans learned to build with stone. And David understood that the chapel itself was just a shell, a facade wrapped around something much older that had been accidentally awakened during that Sunday service in 1984, when the congregation had been singing along to the radio, not knowing that certain frequencies could tear holes in reality. His body was changing now, becoming part of the radio's circuitry, his veins carrying electrical current instead of blood. His thoughts broadcasting on AM frequencies that only the dead could hear. And through this new awareness, he could sense every car on the highway slowing down as they passed exit 7. Their radios automatically tuning to that same song, whether the drivers wanted it or not. Each one a potential replacement, a fresh battery for when David's energy finally ran out. The woman in the flowered dress stepped forward, and David could see through her skin to the mechanical parts underneath. Gears and springs that had replaced her organs 40 years ago. And she spoke without moving her lips, her voice coming through the radio itself, telling him that the first guardian had tried to destroy the radio, tried to break the loop, but that had only made things worse, had let the thing below partially escape. And now the only thing keeping it from fully manifesting was this endless repetition, this prison of pop music that somehow held it better than any prayer or exorcism ever could. David's Honda outside began to dissolve, its metal and plastic breaking down into pure sound waves that flowed back into the chapel, feeding the thing beneath. And he realized that everyone who had ever taken the exit 7 shortcut had left a piece of themselves here, their vehicles becoming part of the chapel's substance, their essence trapped in the endless loop. And as the song began its final chorus, David felt his last connection to the outside world snap. His phone crumbling to dust in his pocket, his driver's license rewriting itself to show an address that didn't exist on a street that had never been built. And when the song ended, there was a moment of perfect silence before it started again from the beginning. Those 4 notes that would now define his existence, until someone else ignored their GPS and took the exit 7 shortcut on a Sunday night. The congregation began to move toward David in perfect synchronization, their feet never quite touching the ground, gliding across the warped floorboards like figures in a music box. And as they surrounded him, He could see that each of their faces bore the same expression of desperate relief mixed with profound sorrow. The look of prisoners watching a new inmate arrive to take their place in solitary confinement. Through the radio fused to his hands, David could feel the entity below, growing stronger with each repetition of the song, feeding on his terror and confusion. And he understood with horrible clarity that this wasn't a prison at all, but a digestive system, slowly breaking down human consciousness into something the creature could absorb. And every person here was at a different stage of that process. Some still clinging to fragments of their identity, while others had become nothing more than echoes wearing human shapes. The chapel's windows began showing different time periods simultaneously. One pane revealing the original 1984 service where it all began. The congregation singing along to the radio when the dimensional barrier cracked. Another showing future Sunday nights with victims yet to come. Their faces clear and detailed, though they hadn't taken the exit yet. Wouldn't take it for years, but their fate was already sealed in this place, where past, present, and future collapsed into a single, eternal moment. David tried to scream, but the sound came out as harmonized backing vocals to the song, his voice splitting into multiple tracks that layered perfectly with the beat. And he realized that everyone here had become part of the music itself. Their souls converted into frequencies and wavelengths that kept the ancient thing beneath entertained, pacified, contained within its prison of endless pop perfection. The woman in the flowered dress reached out and touched his forehead with fingers that felt like static electricity. And suddenly David could see himself from outside his body, watching as his skin began to take on the same translucent quality as the others, his bones visible through flesh that was becoming more suggestion than substance. And he understood that soon he would be just another voice in the chorus, another instrument in this supernatural orchestra that played the same song forever to keep something unimaginable from breaking free. The radio's display showed not the time, but a countdown. Years, months, days, hours, until his replacement would arrive. And David realized with a sick feeling that he could already sense them out there. A traveling nurse named Sarah, who would take this exit in exactly 18 months, 3 days, and 7 hours. Drawn by an inexplicable urge to see what that old chapel looked like in the moonlight. And when she arrived, David would finally be free to dissolve completely into the collective. His consciousness scattered across 40 years of Sunday nights while Sarah took his place at the altar, her hands fused to the same radio, beginning her own countdown toward dissolution as the song started over again. Those 4 notes that had become the bars of a cage built from pure sound, holding back something that should never have been awakened. Something that even now pressed against the barrier, testing it, waiting for the night when someone finally broke the pattern and the music stopped. The radio began to pulse with a heartbeat rhythm beneath the music, and David felt his own heart synchronizing with it, each beat drawing more of his essence into the collective consciousness that powered this eternal prison. And through the shared awareness of all the trapped souls, he could sense the thing below stirring, testing the musical chains that bound it, probing for any weakness in the 40-year-old spell that had transformed a chapel into a supernatural containment facility. The congregation members started to fade in and out of visibility like old television signals losing reception, their forms becoming interference patterns that danced between existence and void. And David understood that they were all part of the same broadcast now. Human static keeping the channel clear, preventing something infinitely worse from breaking through into the world. His hands had become completely fused with the radio, skin and plastic melting together into a new substance that conducted both electricity and souls. And through this connection, he could feel every other victim who had ever held this device, their memories cascading through him like a playlist of human experiences, each one ending the same way, with acceptance, dissolution, and recruitment into the eternal choir. The chapel walls began to breathe, expanding and contracting with the bass line, and David noticed that the building itself was alive, or rather, it had become the physical manifestation of the entity's prison. Every board and nail and pane of glass resonating at exactly the right frequency to maintain the containment field. And if even one element fell out of harmony, if one voice in the congregation stopped singing, the entire structure would collapse and release what should never be freed. Time had completely lost meaning now, and David could see himself aging and reversing simultaneously. His hair going gray, then dark, then gray again, in waves that matched the song's rhythm. Experiencing every moment of his existence compressed into these endless 4 minutes and 58 seconds that somehow contained eternity within their digital grooves. The woman in the flowered dress leaned close and whispered through lips that moved without sound, her words appearing directly in his mind like subtitles to a nightmare, telling him that the original congregation had made a bargain that night in 1984, trading their eternal service for the world's safety, becoming willing prisoners to keep the ancient hunger locked away. And now David was part of that contract, bound by the same desperate prayer that had transformed a simple Sunday service into an infinite loop of salvation and damnation. Through the chapel's windows, he could see the highway beyond, cars passing in slow motion, their drivers unconsciously speeding up as they neared exit 7. Some primal instinct warning them away from this place where reality had been edited, remixed, and remastered into something that violated the laws of physics and faith alike. And David knew that he would watch those cars forever, hoping and dreading in equal measure that one would finally take the exit, bringing either his replacement or his release, though he could no longer remember which outcome he truly desired. The radio's final transformation began as David's consciousness fully merged with the transmission, becoming another frequency in the chapel's eternal broadcast. And he understood with perfect clarity that this was not damnation, but duty, not punishment, but purpose. For the congregation had not been trapped, but had chosen to become the lock itself. Human souls willingly transformed into the spiritual mechanism that kept the door sealed against something that had been waiting to enter our world since before the first prayer was ever spoken. His last coherent thought as David Chen dissolved into pure sound waves was the realization that every song has an ending, even this one. But in this place, the ending was just another beginning. The fade out becoming a fade in, the final note circling back to the first, creating an Ouroboros of melody that would spin forever or until someone stronger, more desperate, or more foolish took his place in the choir. The chapel bells rang one final time, a sound that traveled not through air, but through dimensions, calling to the next traveler who would inevitably take exit 7. Drawn by forces they couldn't understand to a parking lot, honor that existed in all time simultaneously, where a 1984 Honda Civic would be waiting with the keys in the ignition and the radio already playing, because the service must continue, the song must never truly end. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, in spaces that human minds weren't meant to comprehend, an ancient hunger pressed against its musical chains, patient as eternity, knowing that all prisons eventually fail, all songs eventually skip. And when that day comes, the congregation of Exit 7 Chapel will discover whether their infinite sacrifice was salvation or simply a very long delay of the inevitable.